This is Whitley Strieber for subscribers. So let's start out with a little paragraph from the beginning of Robert's new book, The Secret Initiation of Jesus at Qumran. Green-painted graffiti matched the darker drab color of the massive double doors, bordered in faded gray stone. A red circle with angled line forbids vehicle parking, adding to the inhibition I feel as I key in the entry numbers Monsignor Milik has given me. The door clicks, allowing the heavy guardian of the gloomy, high-ceilinged interior hallway to be pushed open and then crunch closed behind me, shutting out the droning vehicles and tired courtier outside. My eyes take several minutes to become accustomed to the dim light. I walk through into an open yard littered with debris, an old motorcycle, a broken bed frame, huge buildings on three sides, entrances everywhere. I am lost. Robert, you were attempting to meet with Monsieur Joseph Milik, Monsignor, I should say, Joseph Milik, the one of the original Dead Sea Scroll scholars, a man many people thought was dead. He had retired so completely from the world. Tell us a little bit about this remarkable man.
Okay, with the background, I suppose, starts with the finding of the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 by a Bedouin in one of the caves, now referred to as Cave 1, in the hills behind Qumran, the northwest coast of the Dead Sea. Once these scrolls and fragments started coming in, and the area was under the control initially of the British Mandate of Palestine, and then after 1948, with the declaration of a state of Israel, war broke out, and the territory of East Jerusalem and Qumran and the West Bank, as it's known now, came under the control of the Jordanians. And the fragments and scrolls, apart from those that had been acquired by Professor Sukanit at the Hebrew University and his son, Yigal Yadin, who eventually rose to become a deputy prime minister of Israel, who's also a keen archaeologist. They acquired 7 of the major scrolls from Cave 1. But a lot of the material that was starting to come in from other caves that were being discovered was being brought into a Dominican monastery known as the École Biblique. It had a study college attached to it. So the scroll fragments were being brought into there, and they were then being studied and translated at the Rockefeller Museum in East, endowed by John Rockefeller. So by 1951-52, there were so many bits coming in, of eventually 88,000 fragments. They were overwhelmed with the prospect of trying to fit them all together to translate these ancient Hebrew documents, Aramaic documents. And so the head of the École Biblique, a Catholic priest, it's a Catholic monastery, Father Roland Deveau, and his colleague, Father Barthelemy, they decided that they would recruit an international team of scholars to try and help them translate, edit, and begin to publish the findings of the text. And they brought in from England, John Allegro from Oxford University. John Strugnell came from England, also from Oxford University. He's still alive. Patrick Skean from Johns Hopkins University in America. Frank Moore Cross in Baltimore University. He's still alive. Klaus Hune Hunzinger from Germany, and Jean Starkey from France. And a key person, the one who became really the respected and revered of the translators. They brought in from he was in Paris, but he'd come via Lublin in Poland. Father Joseph Milik. He was recruited to this translation team in 1953. So they're all living at the École Biblique in East Jerusalem, this monastery, Dominican monastery, and they're walking maybe 20-minute walk to the Rockefeller Museum, where they're working all day and sometimes all night in translating and putting together the fragments. And Joseph Milik, Father Joseph Milik, was and became one of the most hard-working and brilliant of the Dead Sea Scroll team. When the money started running out in 1956, 57, the team broke up, and the various people went in different directions, taking the rights to publishing some of the texts with them. Some of them ended up in various universities in America, in Germany, in France. And Joseph Milik ended up in Paris. And he carried on working for many, many years, still studying, and brilliant scholar. And then he literally dropped out of actually active academic work. He got married, he left the church, and he remained studying and reading, but not actually producing very much for many, many years. And I was fortunate enough to make contact with him before and during the work on my first book, the Copper Scroll Decoded, which came out in 1999.
Yes, and which we talked about on Dreamland.
Yes, that's right. And I got to know Joseph Milik very, very well, and I've been back to visit him and see him, and he's been incredibly helpful in guiding me and informing me and directing me, if you like, in some of the areas that I should look. And it was on one of these visits I came back to present him with a copy of my book, and we talked for many, many hours. He's in his 80s now. I have to say, unfortunately, I'm feeling quite a little bit depressed in a sense, in terms of my friendship with Joseph Milik, because he's probably nearing the end of his life now. He's very, very unwell. I feel quite emotional that he hasn't got too long to live in this world, because he's a very, very fine man. He was a Catholic. He left the Catholic religion, the Catholic Church, but I still think he's kind of a believer, and he certainly believes in God. But he could no longer rationalize, if you like, what he called the historicity of Jesus. There were too many things which he couldn't fit into his view of the period and the reality of Jesus. But nevertheless, he's still a religious person, and anyway, during the course of our conversations, he made some revelations to me. He was, in a way, telling me to go and do things and to look in various areas. And as a result of his guidance, I suppose, he pointed me in the direction of looking at the connections between this community of people who allegedly wrote and possessed the Dead Sea Scrolls and the early followers of Jesus.
Now, he told you a great secret, a secret that was the genesis of this book. Is that not correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yes. Was that secret what caused him to leave the church?
I don't think so. I mean, it's something that he discovered when he was not only was he a scholar, an indoor scholar, as it were, he was also an outdoor scholar and an archaeologist, and active in digging and exploring the ruins around this site where the Essenes lived. The whole of that coast right down to Masada is rich in archaeological artifacts and remains and things you can learn about the earlier period. And he was a very competent archaeologist. So I don't think it was what he revealed to me that motivated his departure from the Catholic Church. But it's something that has not been written up, not been published, not been disclosed previously. And I think the reasoning was rather different from any kind of conflict with his religious beliefs. Although the revelation does have a major impact on religious understanding. Yes.
Well, yes. Let me ask you this, I'd like to say what is the secret, but I'm not going to put you quite on that spot because it's not quite fair to you. You've written an entire book about this secret, and quite rightly in the book you suggest that we read the book before coming finally to that conclusion. But let me ask you a simple question. Is Christianity essentially an ancient Egyptian mystery cult transported to Judea?
I wouldn't like to refer to it in terms of as a mystery cult per se, although there are many things we don't understand, so there is a mystery element, if you like. But I think when I was talking to William, he referred to Akhenaten, and a lot of people refer to this pharaoh Akhenaten from the 18th dynasty, the 14th century BCE, nearly 1400 years before the time of Jesus. Refer to him as a heretic, as a heretical king, pharaoh. But that, I think, is a derogatory term to apply in this sense. A heretic is someone who doesn't believe in the conventional religion of the day, who's outside the sort of establishment, if you like. And in that sense, Akhenaten was. But his heresy was, in fact, finding the truth. So I think one could turn it round and saying all the people at that time who were worshipping idols, pagans, demons, mythological figures, dins, ghosts, goodness knows what, carved statues, they were the heretics. They were following a heresy of worshipping man-made idols. Akhenaten came to a truth that you can't worship things you carve out of stone. They're man-made. Why should you worship those? Rather worship the moon or the sun or the Nile or the wind or the thunder or whatever. Something a little bit more esoteric and mystical, I suppose. And he came to the conception that this mystical God, supreme mystical God, was represented by the sun, but he certainly wasn't worshipping the sun. And we know from the writings that the Amarna tablets, many of them in the British Museum, in the museum in Berlin, and also in the Brooklyn Museum in New York. There are a number of Amarna tablets, and they are letters from vassal kings and rulers in Canaan, writing back to Akhenaten and to his father, Amenhotep III, about the problems that were going on in Canaan. And because of this correspondence, they're on clay tablets written in the sort of cuneiform Akkadian, which was the lingua franca of the period and of that area. We know what was going on. Both at his capital city at Amarna and in Egypt, and also what was going on in Canaan in terms of the political and military situation. And we know a lot about Amarna from his own carvings on tomb walls, the prayers and writings on tomb walls. We know that he had a very, very pure vision of one God, of an invisible God. So the idea that he was a heretic is a kind of a misconception.
Well, maybe he wasn't a heretic at all. Maybe what had happened was that a very, very ancient religion, a kind of basic religion, that there is one God and that resurrection into that Godhead is possible for man, to just put it at its most basic, was present under the surface for a long time, and Akhenaten recovered it. Is that possible? Because, excuse me, when we look back at the Osiris stories and at the Osirian itself, and we see the water-related ideas of the journey upward from the Nile River by the soul into the Milky Way, the river of the sky, and fantastically, we see that idea repeated in places as far away as the cave of the White Shaman in South Texas, 5,000 years old, where the shaman is rising out of his body before the waters of the Pecos River and up into the sky, which would have been the Milky Way, demonstrating the same principle to us. Is it not true that baptism of the waters of life is perhaps the most fundamental of all religious practices, and Akhenaten was restoring it, not a heretic at all? He didn't invent it.
Yes. I think there's several factors going on here at the same time, and I'm sure you're right. The ideas that we have of resurrection and this baptism and coming into a new life, these ideas are current and have come back. I think, in my view, the situation was more like Akhenaten did away with all that. He abolished all the ideas of Osiris, of the ruler over death, of the dark, of the night. His concept was to get rid of everything like that, and rebirth and so on. He was against that. He abolished it virtually by edict and went about destroying all figures of Isis, Horus, Osiris. They were no-go gods. And what happened was, when the early followers of Jesus imbibed essentially what was a pure stream, a golden pure stream of Akhenaten's beliefs, it got somewhat corrupted, because after Akhenaten died, which he only ruled for about 17 years, he only had a short period in which to instill his dream on the whole of Egypt, and beyond Egypt. His dream was to spread his idea to all people. But he died, and everything reverted back. So Osiris and Horus and resurrection ideas all came streaming back in. So by the time you get down to the 1st century CE, the time of Jesus, and the people who start writing the story of Jesus are beginning with a pure golden stream story, they are in an environment where Osiris, Mithras, holy water, revival, resurrection are all part of the current stream of religious knowledge. So some of that gets imbibed into the New Testament, into the ideas of Gnosticism, into the ideas of baptism. They're picked up by the writers of the New Testament and the Gnostic writers and incorporated. And they come essentially from Egypt. A lot of them come from Egypt, you're right. But they are the kind of the surrounding patchwork to this pure stream that has crept back in. The ideas have crept back in. And the idea of a Trinity, a Holy Trinity, Jesus, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, this triple deity, like resurrection, like your white shaman rising out of his body. These are mystical, sometimes Egyptian, sometimes Mesopotamian ideas that have come back into vogue, particularly in the Roman and Greek philosophies. Mithras, Dionysus, they're all kind of those mystical ideas, and they are incorporated into what we talk about as conventional text, the New Testament. Some of them creep into the Old Testament, no question about that. But I don't think they're part of the Golden Stream. I think they're corruptions, if you like. But there's no question that they do enter into religious ideas all the way down through history. Because they're powerful motives in their own right. Resurrection and Buddhist ideas are powerful, attractive ideas.
What is the Golden Stream?
The Golden Stream, I can visualize it in my mind as this. Okay, you've got a polytheistic Egypt with hundreds of gods, but there are a number, and usually it's this triad. It's usually three gods together. Hence, this Trinity idea crops up again, because they are powerful ideas and they don't go away. And it crops up in Christianity. This Golden Stream, it bubbles up from the earth, if you like, at the time of Akhenaten. His father, and probably with Jacob and Joseph, the Hebrews, who he encounters, you can't say they conceive of God, because God is already there, but they come to a realization that there is only one God, and all these other gods, Osiris and Mut and Ra and Khons, Horus, he says they're not relevant. So his Golden Stream, in my view, is this idea there is only one invisible, supreme, omnipotent, ethereal power that he calls Aten. And that Golden Stream he initiates with Jacob and Joseph, the Hebrew patriarchs. And that Golden Stream is kept within the heart of the followers of Jacob and Joseph and the priests of Akhenaten, who take it away when he dies and keep it alive, that Golden Stream. And it flows down with Moses out through Egypt, across the Sinai, across the Negev, and lands up in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land. And it's preserved by this devout community of very religious, dedicated people who live at Qumran. And that Golden Stream flows on into Christianity and flows on into Islam as well. The idea of one omnipotent, pure God.
Now, as far as I understand it, Akhenaten believed that the sun was this God.
You see symbols of the Aten as a disc, as a circular disc, which sometimes appears as a winged sun, a sun with wings coming out of both sides of it, and it's a sun. It's referred to as a sun disc. But if you look at the works of Cyril Aldred, who was really one of the greatest archaeologists and excavators at Amana, and Breasted, Henry Breasted, an American scholar, These people, and today, Eric Hornung, read Method and Roger Saba, read Sigmund Freud, Moses and Monotheism, and you get a clear picture. And I got a clearer picture from actually going to Amana and studying the writings and the works of Akhenaten, which are come through into the Old Testament, the New Testament. You get a clear picture that he didn't worship the sun per se. It was an image of an invisible God. And you say, well, you can't have an image of God. Okay, that's true, but he wasn't worshipping that image. It's quite clear that he envisaged something behind the sun as the real power. That was a mental crutch, if you like, and probably necessary at that time. And we're talking 3,500 years ago. And okay, the Egyptian people were extremely advanced in terms of civilization. They were probably more advanced than any other nation in the known world at that time. I'm sure they were in terms of science and astronomy, mathematics, geometry. They were incredibly knowledgeable, but their minds had been conditioned to understanding concrete objects, to worshipping gods that they could carve and carry around on a bark, on a ship up the Nile. These were images that they needed to cling on to of their gods, of Isis. They had statues of Isis and Horus, Osiris. These were physical, solid objects they could worship. So to suddenly tell them you can no longer believe in anything that you can see was probably just too much of a break. So I think Akhenaten said, okay, I can make that jump in my mind, but I can understand the people won't. So let's have an image, and the best image I can come up with is the sun. It's indestructible. It's up in the heavens. It's incredibly bright. So light became his dominant motif. Light and the sun became his motif, if you like, for an invisible God. But he did not worship the sun. And there's a great confusion in the Old Testament, and people who write about this will talk about sun worship and mix it up with the symbols for the Aten and sun worship, which are two separate things.
Now, Jesus is very like Osiris and very like Mithra in the Mithraic cult as well. Where does he come into this? Because is it an attempt to reestablish the idea of resurrection, perhaps to revitalize the faith, or exactly where does he come into it?
I don't know. I mean, I think you've got to put yourself back into that milieu, in that incredibly mixed and confusing period when there were so many religions swirling around, and Jesus' ideas must have been influenced by everything around him. Assuming he's a genius, he's got a divine inspirational mind. He's going to take on board everything that's going on around him, including Dionysus, Mithras, Osiris, Seraphim, the ideas from Alexandria, Egyptian, Greek, all the history of Greek mythology, of Hebrew mythology. All these things are going to be known to him. And he conveys, perhaps, and one's postulating here, of course, some of these ideas to his followers, who, when they come to write down his story, then resurrection and Osiris and Mithras come into the story, because they are current in the Greek ambience that they live in, and the Roman-dominated community. They may be Jewish. Some of the writers of the New Testament may not be Jewish. So they're even more influenced by the mystic religions. So you're right. I'm sure you're right. They do come in, and the ideas of resurrection come from from Osiris, as you said correctly, I'm sure, and Mithras. They come from other cultures, and they're conjoined with this new religion, of Christianity.
So, Robert, we have come to the end of a journey together and entered deep into a mystery of the relationship between an ancient Egyptian religion and the worship that we practice, many of us, every day of our lives. A most illuminating book indeed, The Secret Initiation of Jesus at Qumran. And frankly, in terms of a person's moral journey, reading this book, like reading The Mystery of the Copper Scrolls of Qumran, is a very, very powerful experience. Robert, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you indeed. I very, very much enjoyed talking to you.